Now I want to talk about checking the valve clearances. I've made this worksheet. It's available in the downloads from the description of this video. It's the same for a 1200 as for the 1250. And we're going to measure the original clearances. There's a worksheet up here for doing this event once, and there's a duplicate. You can do it a second time down here. But since we're working on the left cylinder, we've got the left intakes front and rear, and the left exhaust front and rear. We'll measure and record the original clearance. Then we'll take off the bearing cap and measure the thickness of those shims. If any of the clearances are not where we want them, we'll put in new shims and establish a new clearance. The range of what we're looking for is between 10 and 17 millimeters, 0.10 and 0.17, and the exhaust is from 0.34 to 0.41. I used to adjust these to be in the mathematical center, and I don't do that anymore because I found that they are a little bit too noisy for me. So my new target values are 0.12 and 0.36 in the not just mathematical middle of these numbers over here. Since I've got that range, I have a set of feeler gauges that I use, that I cannibalized 3 sets of feeler gauges to measure this. The intakes go from 10 to 17, and I have feeler gauges from 10 to 18. The exhausts they're supposed to be within 34 to 41, and I have from 33 to 42. First thing we're going to do is I'll measure the intake valves, and I'm going to just start with the 16.16, and on the front one here, we'll just see if it even goes in. Doesn't go in. On the rear one, doesn't go in. So I'll go to a 15. We'll find one. 16 didn't go in. 15 does on the front. I'm going to record the front valve clearance, left cylinder, front intake, 0.15. Now the rear intake, 15 doesn't go in. Try 14, and 14 goes in pretty sloppy. I think it's between 14 and 15. We'll call it 0.145. Now measure the exhaust. We'll start with about 36. That goes in. Now it's 36 goes in, but if I have it a little bit crooked, it's tight. The difference between there and someplace in the middle, it slides easily. Each one of these lobes on the back side has a small cutout in the base circle to allow new oil to be sling oil that's just floating around in the cylinder head here, to get between the follower and the cam. Those notches are on the inside of both of these lobes. You want to make sure your feeler gauge is closer to the outside of the follower and the valve. Now you need to make sure that the feeler gauge is not binding by being too far in or binding by being too far out. There's just a point in the middle where you have the correct amount of sliding friction, and this one slides too easily for a 36. Go up a little bit, and here's a 38. Slide it in, and it's still loose in there at 38. Here's 40. 40 goes in, but it's pretty good. That's the amount of friction that I would say that's a 40. We'll record it on the worksheet down here. The front exhaust is 0.40. Now the rear, we'll start again at 36. 36 goes in way too loose. There's 38. That is a good feel for 38. So the back one is 38, 0.38. If we look at the worksheet, look at our targets down here. Our target for the intake is 0.12. Well, these are quite a bit over that. Likewise, the exhaust target is 0.36. The value that we have up here is 0.40, real close to the limit of 0.41. We're going to adjust all of these shims. We need to change out all of these shims. Now I need to take the bearing cap off and actually measure the shim thicknesses themselves. These are M6 cap screw bolts. That's T30. Remember that the factor of 5, M6, the factor times 5 means it's a Torx 30. Likewise another example would be the bolts that hold the rear wheel on the bike. They're M10s, and times a factor of 5, it takes a Torx 50. It's an easy way to remember these small range Torx bolts. Just spin these off here real quick. All right, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the axial fixation pin on. Okay, the axial fixation pin, when the top bolt is removed, you saw this thing jump out of position. There's a spring underneath this little bullet point. It's not lined up with the top up here, so it gets compressed as it goes in place. But the bottom bolt has a small sleeve on it. Here, I'll show you how it goes in. There's a small sleeve underneath here that needs to be referenced. When this goes into the casting, that goes in, and then you put in your bolt. When the second bolt is kind of snugged up, then you can push in against the bullet detent to hold it in position. I keep those bolts separate with the axial fixation bolt. I'll finish taking out the rest of these now. Got a place on my workbench here where I can take these off. There are 2 dowel pins that hold this in position, hold the whole bearing block in position. Got to work it off of the dowel pins. The bolts are all removed, but the dowel pins are what are locating this in the cylinder head. Listen carefully. When I take the cams away from the followers, the 2 bottom followers will fall down because their pivots are on the bottom, and they will fall. These fall down. When the other 1200 wet heads, these are pivoted on the top. They don't make this, they don't fall down like this. So I'm going to set this on my workspace down here. Now I need to get the magnet, and we'll start measuring the shim thicknesses. You need a good digital micrometer to do this. You really can't use a vernier caliper. It's not accurate enough. Here I'm going to lift up the follower with the magnet in my hand and pull off the shim that's inside here. You just get it close to the shim and it'll pull it off. See, this side here has a small shiny circle on it, and this side is a larger shiny circle. The larger shiny circle rubs against the back side of the follower. The small shiny circle rubs on the tip of the valve itself. Now I'm going to measure this shim and record it. This one measures 2.20. I'm going to put them down on my work surface the same way that they came out of here. So now the front intake is 2.20. Now do the rear intake. And we'll measure it. .16. Front exhaust. I'm going to record this as 2.194. I'm going to take it out another decimal point. rear exhaust. .18. If we look at the worksheet, if our clearance was 2.15 and our target is 2.12, this is open by 0.03. If I add 0.03 to this shim, that will give me the clearance that I want. I'm looking for a 2.23 shim thickness. In this kit of shims, the one that comes, this is a Wiseco Shim Kit, and it comes with about 53 shims to start with. And I've added quite a few shims to this kit. There's about 240 shims in here. Well, the first thing I'm going to look for is a 2.23. I've got the numbers that are on here don't really follow anymore. All of these that are in this group are 2.24s. I'm just going to get them out here so they're easy to work on. I'm going to use the micrometer to actually measure these and find one that's maybe 2.23. This is a bit tedious, but there's a 2.23, 2.232. So this is the one we're going to use. So I'm going to put a 2.23 into here. This is the one I'm going to use. It's going to go in the front intake right there. I'm going to record on the worksheet that I'm going to put in a 2.23 in here, and I'll put it in right now. So I put it on the magnet. This is a used shim, and they don't really wear, but they have a small shiny area on them. I'm going to put this side so that the shiny part, the big shiny part, goes against the follower, and the little shiny part goes against the valve stem. Just lift up the follower, place it over the socket in the valve keeper, the top of the spring keeper, put the follower down and wipe it off of the magnet. Now it's in the correct seated position underneath the follower on the valve tip. I'm going to put all these back into this cubby hole that I had for 2.24. And the next one, it had a clearance of 0.145 with a shim that was 2.16. If I'd like to take this down at least 0.02, probably 0.025, I want to add that number to this. I want this to be a 2.18 or a 2.185 or a 2.19, something in that size. Go over here and see if I have a whole segment of here's 2.16s. These must be the 2.18s right here. So now I'm looking for a 2.185. Okay, I'm going to use one of these that's 2.185. That's exactly what I wanted. So I'm going to write down here a 2.185. It's going to go in the rear intake. I find the big shiny spot is going to go closest to the follower, and the little shiny spot is going to go closer to the valve. Put it in here, wipe it off, close the follower. For the exhaust, it was at 0.40. I want it to be at 0.36. I need to, in order to take this down, I need to add 0.06 to this number. So let's round that off to 2.20. I want a 2.26. These are all 2.26s or thereabouts. 2.263. I think that'll be just right. I'm going to write this down. 2.263, and that's the front. Here's the little shiny circle and the big shiny circle. So we're going to put it in with the little shiny circle in. Just going to push it in with my finger. The oil stiction will hold it in place. Finally, the rear exhaust is 2.18. Well, it was 38, and I want to go down to 36. To make this tighter by 0.02, I add 0.02 on this, so that makes it a 2.20 that I'm looking for the new shim. These should be all 2.20s. 2.20. This is the one that's going in the rear. This is a brand new one, so it doesn't matter how it goes in. Doesn't have any existing wear marks to it at all. Now that's in place, and we're ready to put the cams back on and the bearing block. So I put a 2.20 in this one, 2.20. So we've recorded all of the values of the new shims. I just pick up the cams out of the bearing block and I look at the end of them and I see the laser etched mark at the bottom. That's what I want to line up. So I'm just going to put it up here. I have to lift up these cam followers to put this cam in position. Pick it up and have the cam followers go into place. And I look at the end over here and I can see that it's way out of position. It's not even close. I just pull it out a little bit, work it around the teeth a few times, put it into a tooth, make sure that it's engaged. Now I'm trying to line up the face of this flat with the machined surface face of the cylinder head. That looks parallel. That one I think is about in the right position. We're going to check it again later. Now we're going to pick up the intake cam out of here. I look at the end of it and I see that the laser etch mark is kind of at the bottom there. So I bring it up in place, put it into the tooth on the other end, look at the face of it, and it is not lined up. This face here is not parallel with this over here. It needs to be rotated. I disengage the tooth from the other end, rotate it one tooth. That looks pretty close. So this is parallel to this face right here. I've got this all held in. Both cams are held in with one hand. Just kind of, now I pick up, one more thing before you put this back in place. Make sure that this gasket, this O-ring, is in place for the spark plug tunnel between the bearing cap and the spark plug tunnel. You can see on the base, on the bottom of this cam bearing block, see these pins sticking out? There's a couple of pins, the locating dowel pins. There's one right here. That's what holds this in place. Now I just kind of put the bearing against the cam on one part, and then I can just walk this into position. It lines up with those dowels, holds all the cams in place. Once I got my hands off of this whole thing, well, just by doing that little bit of a fallout, that cam rotated one tooth and it's off. This is just something that you have to be careful with as you're moving this stuff. That, come over here and look on this end, and you can see that this is no longer parallel to the face of this over here. It's moved. I have to work off the bearing block again. This happens quite a bit, to where you just have to check and double check that you get these in the right position. There. Once you get the bearing cap on and the teeth are engaged, we verified that the flats are straight. Still keep a hand on your bearing cap. Just get one of these started in here. It'll hold your bearing cap on. Then quickly put in all the rest of them. My little screwdriver gun here is set to 5 Newton meters, so this doesn't exceed the torque that we're going to put on these. These all get 10 Newton meters of torque. So here's the axial fixation pin. You put the sleeve in first into the edge of the bearing cap, then get your bolt started. Now you have to push this one in against the spring to get it to start the threads. We'll torque all these. These are, since they're M6s, they're T30 torques. This gets 88.6 inch-pounds of torque. Go to 89. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And everything's torqued. Before I remeasure the clearances on this, I pull out the pin for the top dead center locker. First I loosen this cam chain tensioner, makes it easier to turn this over. Now we'll turn the engine over. Here we're approaching top dead center one more time for this cylinder. There is the top dead center for this side, and we're going to remeasure the clearances for the valves again. The intake, I'm going to start off with, this is 13 millimeter. Doesn't quite fit. Here's 12. 12 doesn't quite fit either. Here's 10. 10 fits real sloppy. I think it's 11.5. The new clearance that I'm going to record down here now for the new clearance is 0.115. The rear intake, 10 fits super sloppy. And 12 fits a little bit loose. Here's 13. And 13 just fits. So it's a 13. 0.13. Now the exhaust, here's a 36 for the front exhaust. Doesn't quite fit. Here's a 34. and it fits pretty sloppy. So it's a 35, 0.35. Rear exhaust, 34 fits easily. Here's 36. It fits just right. It's 36, 0.36. Our targets were 12 and 36, and we got 11.5 and 13, and the exhaust was 36, and we got 35 and 36. This is good on this side. Now I'm going to unlock the pin. We'll be able to move it from top dead center on this side to rotate the engine over and lock it in on the other side. While we're here on this side, I'm going to go ahead and hook up the solenoid. Remember, there's this little locking pin, goes on the same side as the key on the connector. Slide it in, then this slides home. Rotate this around, goes up in position. These bolts are shorter than all the rest of them for the solenoid. They also get the same 10 Newton meters of torque. Double check these axial fixation. Okay, so this side's double checked, and we've retorqued the cam timing trigger. All the bearing caps have been torqued, the solenoid's been torqued, and the axial fixation pin has been torqued. Now I'm going to remove the cam chain tensioner completely from this side. Then we'll move it to the other side. Rotate the engine to top dead center for the other side. We'll go over there and work on it. When I put the cam chain tensioner in on this side, we're going to use a new O-ring. There's a new O-ring that fits on here. This has a different torque value than the standard wet head. This gets 32 Newton meters instead of 30 Newton meters. Now the top dead center pin is out. It's easy to turn the engine over. We'll just turn it over, and the very next time that it falls into the slot, it will be at top dead center for the other side. Now you can see on this side that the laser etched mark is at the very top instead of at the bottom. It's 180 degrees out. The other side is at top dead center now.